right, I think we can get started. Well, 1 minute to go, okay? Though I don't expect many more people joining on a Friday morning after the party. I really appreciate your stamina after a long week to be here, to be listening to me. This rendering of my voice today is not what I usually have. The party last night turned me into the Italian version of Barry White in terms of voice, which is kind of weird. And anyway, my name is Marco Venuti. I'm at Thales, and I've been in the identity space for 23 years now in different capacity, but what matters for the purpose of today's conversation is that I had multiple product management roles into company, both delivering governance solutions and access solutions, which is part of what is relevant for what we're going to discuss today. The purpose of the session today, and maybe if the clicker helps me, I go to the next slide, is to deliver you a better understanding of a few trends that are definitely maybe no longer a trend, but more of a very mainstream set of needs that emerged over the last 3 years around B2B. Interestingly, if you check the agenda of this event, there are very few sessions on the B2B subject. And it's growing the understanding of what it entails, but we are not yet there, okay? So the reason why you're sitting here, and is the punchline and what I call the bottom line at first principles, I'm giving you now what you need to know and you walk away with, is that, of course, we are all aware that the digital transformation that all of us are subject to in the way we run our business has implications, and that SIAM solution, specifically in the identity domain, is part of what is instrumental to tackle them. Or more precisely, not any SIAM solution, but what we could call B2B AIM solutions. This is the key thing that I would like you to walk away with, okay? So if the day and party was too harsh, you can go now. That's all you need to know, okay? But to elaborate on that a bit more, if you want, I will start clarifying. I don't know, this clicker is not helping me. Let's do that. What we hear from the customer we have the pleasure to serve, okay? There are multiple needs. Just to summarize the top 3 of them is that, well, my digitalization of the offering is as requirement. I need to be faster in the way I react. So that's one of the reasons why we're having the conversation with them. Second one, well, my customers. I need to build a better digital reputation with my customer. I need to offer them a smooth experience. That's another thing that we often hear. There is a third one, which is I need to be more effective, more efficient in the way I interact with my external constituents. Okay, this is the third type of needs that we more often than before hear from our customers. Let's be a bit more specific and let's look at an example. I pick an example of a relatively small company in Europe, an insurance company, which has, like many other insurances, brokers and agents in the way they reach customers. So some in-between go-to-market partner before getting to customers. Customers that might well be themselves either consumers or B2B organizations, so B2B customers. And in this case, relatively small means that they had 4,000, 5,000 employees, not that many, and few millions of customers, but in between 35,000 brokers and agents. So a significant number, much higher than the number of users within their own organization. And the problem was, well, it's becoming overwhelming. We need to deliver access to those brokers. Of course, they need to have access to selected application for selling our solutions, and there are so many. Okay, so we need to make a better job in the way we manage them, or potentially leave them alone, manage themselves, allow them to be self-sufficient. Okay? So this is just a very simple and concise representation of something that is not belonging only to insurance, but is rather ubiquitous. So if we pick a generic organization, any company has customers, which can be indeed B2B customers, not necessarily only consumers, depending the type of business, of course. And more often than not, in the middle, there is some category of partners involved in the way they reach those customers. And this is just looking at the go-to-market side of the story. There is, of course, also the procurement side, which involves suppliers, which are, again, by definition, only organizations and not individual. Now, depending on the various industries, there are different names for those categories of partners, right? So it can be that you have broker or agents, as we mentioned before, but if we, for instance, look at manufacturing, those can be reseller or distributors, okay? So we have different names in the different categories depending on the industry. I can fill 5 slides like this, okay? ChatGPT helps, it's gonna take a few minutes and you have the full list and spectrum of different nomenclature of the different industry. Though, regardless of those names, there are some common track. There's a common denominator in what all those constituents are required to be provided with. To make it concise, Friday morning friendly version of the short and sweet requirements in B2B. Can I delegate access to those companies? Okay. Is there a way for me to be offloaded from the burden of managing those individuals myself centrally and let them manage themselves, or have some form of delegated manager doing that by them? By the way, they are not coming from the HR system because they are in an external company, so I need to onboard them, okay? And this is something that I haven't been doing internally in the B2E solutions I'm using. I need to manage the onboarding process. And maybe it's different for supplier than for brokers, okay? The way I need to onboard, different level of assurance are required. Then, of course, I need to provide them access, and as they are not part of my company, they also need to accept the terms and conditions of the services I'm providing them with. So this is a very short list. If you want to have the full list, feel free to reach out. We have many examples of requirement RFI, RFP from different customers in different industry being more specific in what I just called out here in four bullets. Okay? Now, what is usually required to address this sort of needs? I'm turning now for a slide in what are the capabilities and solutions that you might want to evaluate in serving those requirements. There are 3 types of needs, 3 types of capabilities that are instrumental to address this scenario. Number 1, managing the journey, the onboarding, the consent, the access, the classical SIAM solutions capability in having strong form of authentication where required, validation depending on the level of assurance I need, consent for the terms and conditions or maybe on the attributes. We call them the orchestration part of the journey. Okay, it's about using the right ingredient, and again, maybe it's different for the brokers than for the suppliers, the way I want to manage the onboarding and the access we deliver them. There is a second category, which is the way we authorize those users. If you build in-house applications, but also if you run commercial off-the-shelf application, more often than not, we assist to customers' requirement in centralizing and modeling the contextual authorization required for those users. This is served by the external authorization solution category, okay, and is about indeed having a central place where the identity information are leveraged to build at runtime the authorization that a given user needs to be provided with. There is a middle space, which is maybe what is absolutely specific to B2B, because number 1 and number 2 are types of solution, types of requirements also emerging in traditional SIAM for consumer cases. While the middle one, what we call the extended team, is B2B specific. And this is, all right, so I now have a broker, and I want them to be self-sufficient. I want to have a delegated manager that onboard his own colleagues, and he knows them, right? So that is relieving us from that. So there are solutions which are usually called delegation management solutions, which are designed for that, okay? Business user-friendly user interfaces to allow somebody on that partner side to manage their user population. And this is the core of the efficiency in my third bullet in terms of requirements that we usually assist from our customer. Now, these types of approach is not necessarily what many of our customers started with. Let me give you a short story in 3 episodes of what we saw multiple times. By the way, how many of you are already running an IGA solution of any sort for their internal user population? Okay. So, again, a few years ago, multiple times, we saw customers saying, all right, we already invested quite some time into the governance solution we are happy about. And now we have external users. We have partners that we want also to deliver access to? Well, we will reuse that investment, we will leverage that governance solution to extend the number of users we manage in there, and we also will allow the delegated manager for those partners to be controlling other users in there. Well, this approach is not working for a number of reasons. First of all, because of course a governance solution doesn't feature any whatsoever access side. There is no single sign-on, there is no onboarding, okay? There is no authentication involved into that. So that is not ticking a number of boxes, and so is rejected. Any attempt in that direction is very often considered, but not even started. And when started, is usually reconsidered later on, very soon. So there is a second approach. All right, point taken, then we will use some SIAM solution. This will allow us now to have a flexible way to model the way we onboard users, multiple form of authentication, maybe bring your own ID through social or whatever, national ID, industry ID. That's fine. Well, that's fine, yes, but has some room for improvement. It's much better than before, but it's still not ideal. And it's not ideal because we are delivering access to users, and that's fine, but the delegated manager is not provided with a user-friendly experience in managing his own population of constituents, and very often is very complex and convoluted the way I need to configure such a solution to isolate partner A from partner B for obvious reasons, because they should not be able to see each other, right? I want to maintain centrally the complete picture, but each partner should only be allowed to see his own user set. So traditional SIAM solutions are not ideal. Why that? Because in a traditional SIAM solution, yes, you have a delegated manager kind of interface, but that's derived from the admin experience of the product. Is a variation of the technical design configuration experience. By definition, is not business user friendly. To be business user friendly, you need a business application. That's why a B2B SIAM solution is adding one more application to the application estate that you have already, okay, for the various business processes you run, and that extra one more application is the one purpose-built for user management, for delegated user management. Is a business application incidentally managing users, but it's not an admin UI, okay, that's my point. So with that, all the requirements are ticked, okay, and is much more viable and much better than the other approaches I just summarized. We are at Identiverse, so allow myself to add an extra slide which is a bit more technical than what I usually include in a deck for delivering a better understanding of what B2B entails. But the key thing is that whenever we have a B2B conversation, we have a central organization and many partners, okay? Here color-coded in these slides. You have the ordinary users on the partner side, and you have the delegated manager on the partner side. Centrally, in the central organization, you have what we could call the partner manager, the persona which is managing the onboarding of those organizations, because this is a very important point. There is an onboarding of the organization too. It's not just the onboarding of the user. B2B uniquely feature a nested problem. You have the user onboarding problem, but you also have the organization onboarding problem, okay? Which is of course not applicable in traditional SIAM. So that defines a grid of requirements that are distributed in terms of who does what in those persona. The key thing in these slides is that 3 out of 4 are business profiles, are not technical users. And the key one, for instance, is the partner manager, or more precisely, the nexus of complexity of doing a good job or a poor job in B2B is about the way a new partner organization is created. Is that a business thing with a few point and click and maybe a validation? Or do I need to create a tenant, okay, which is a super technical thing, okay? There are different solutions, have different approaches, and of course it's highly preferable to have the ability to have a business user doing the partner onboarding part. Similarly, how do I nominate or delegate somebody in that organization to be able to control other people? Can that individual sub-delegate to others if that organization becomes too big to be managed by a single person, okay? How is that achieved? How do I make it happen? And finally, of course, how do I structure? What kind of access groups, roles are belonging to each and every of those partners? Again, this is just the relatively short version of what the core requirements and the core distribution of who does what are in our understanding and experience in B2B. I started this presentation saying that this is just the second. I think there are 2-3 sessions. There's 200 sessions at Identiverse. If you check your agenda and try to spot how many B2B related sessions are there are 2, okay? Which is interesting. And this also has to do with what we call the lost in translation, okay? What we call B2B SIAM, or B2B Identity and Access Management, still lacks a unified nomenclature from the analyst to make sure that we understand each other, okay? We very often hear customers saying, oh, there is a solution for managing the delegated user. I didn't even know there was such a thing in terms of market offering. This is very frequently the case. We are still in that phase, okay? And maybe they express themselves in various forms. Or we need a delegation of authority solution, or we need to deal with third-party onboarding or guest account manager. I just collected a few of them. This is not the full list. There is a longer list, okay? But is just to make clear that is still lacking a single name, or at least it was. Gartner lately came up with finally a single way to define what we mean, and we will look at the slide in a minute. So what I'm saying is that when it comes to deal with B2B, there are a few identity ingredients which are part of what is required, with different proclivity in the organization we serve to evaluate a make versus buy approach. Nobody is no longer considering to build themselves the core identity capabilities, okay? Every organization is procuring those capabilities through some commercial off-the-shelf, some market solutions, cloud or on-prem, depending on the needs. So the core identity, the federation, the single sign-on, the identity store, nobody's building that in-house. Similarly, the orchestration of the onboarding journey is becoming pretty much 90% of the time something that the organization we interact with are also procuring from some market solution providers, such as we are, for instance. In the fine-grained authorization, that's not yet the case, and maybe will never be the case, because there is a big diversity there depending on the industry. But comparing what we now see over what was like 5 years ago, we now see a number of customers which are centralizing the way they manage authorization and the way they model them in a contextual runtime fashion. The final one is what I call B2B delegation and management, and this is what I was calling subject to the lost in translation effect. This is 50% of the time built in-house. Why? Because very often there is lack of awareness of the existence of market solution for that, okay? So it's not intentional, but it's rather a side effect of the lost in translation effect. This brings me to almost the final slide. I said that Gartner lately means really very recent, November last year, in the cover page of the Magic Quadrant was calling out that there is an increasing need for flexible delegated lifecycle management for B2B users. In the report, they are even more specific. They say if you need to pick a SIAM solution, make sure that it's future-proof, meaning that they also cover the B2B side. Maybe you don't need that now, but that's coming, okay? I'm just paraphrasing, but this is pretty much what the Gartner report says. Second part, very interesting. This is still Gartner, last Magic Quadrant. 1/3 of the vendor only are doing a decent job in that space. And this is where I started. There is still a bit of a disconnect. What we assist out there in terms of what our customers are asking us for is still not addressed yet by many colleagues in the industry in terms of capability purpose design for B2B use cases. Why is that? I think it's due to the tradition. The way identity started 20 plus years ago was very B2E, was very workforce centric, okay? And was categorizing the identity solution is, we have the identity solution, the meta directory, and then the governance on one side, And then we have the access and the authentication on another side. There was a number of companies which were either doing one or the other. The way we describe B2B and what B2B entails is cutting across. It requires both things. It requires both some governance capability and some access capability. That finds many solution providers short in their ability to address this sort of needs. That's my understanding. This is pretty much the story I have for you. Before going to the final slide, I would like to, of course, address any question if you have any. Please.
Two things. I was intrigued that on your overview slide there wasn't a delegated IGA solution that was interacting with the core capability, because to me, for a large enterprise level partner, that would be an obvious choice.
You mean, good question, thanks for that, because what we call delegation management is very similar in many use cases to what IGA is there for. Though usually in the IGA space you have, requirements which are not belonging in B2B, such as, role mining, or certification campaign, or separation of duty control. These sort of things are very B2B specific because of the complexity, because of the number of users, and then the granularity of the access managed within the ecosystem of internal application. B2B, and maybe I haven't called it out before, so thanks again for the question, tend to have less application involved with a much more coarse-grained granularity of kind of access to be delivered, which is removing some needs, many needs that IGA solutions are usually entailing. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why delegation management is, and it was in my lost in translation, why at times called also light IGA, okay, because of that reason. There is a lot of proximity, but there is a much improved attention in the usability, especially of the onboarding of organizations. Onboarding of organization is nowhere in any IGA solution these days.
Which would be my second question, if you indulge me.
Sure.
Do you see a link between sort of very well-developed supplier management capabilities and the partner onboarding?
Well, suppliers are a B2B constituent, so yes, there is, though suppliers tend to be less volatile. Another defining trait of very often B2B is that, for instance, back to the broker example, or it could be a reseller, it could be distributors, is that just like user keep coming and going because you hire somebody and maybe he resigns and goes away, so are doing the B2B partners, okay, depending on the industry, again, where you are. So you might have a fairly frequent need to add or remove or change or the number of organizations you're dealing with. On the supplier side, that also happened, but to a lower extent. Tend to be a bit more of a, in manufacturing, I mean, we have customers where we have, and now I'm contradicting myself, the last case we, we serve, there is 1,500 suppliers, and they are maybe 10% every year are changing, okay? Though the onboarding of those, the process for onboarding those organizations is not typically captured or not natively in any IGA solution these days. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other question, please?
Using your insurance case, a lot of insurers, they do have this B2B complexity, and they're working with 10 or 15-year-old legacy systems, highly customized.
Yeah.
When you go into one of those buyers, what do you tell them in terms of what it's going to take to transition? How long is this going to take? Because some of the people I'm working with, it's so old, so delicate, they're looking at me like, I don't want to touch it. Do you have a plan or a path to take an insurance company off something that's highly customized and 50 years old? Can you do it using incrementals, like just using delegation management?
I focus the time I had today indeed on the front end user experience. What you are touching is the below the iceberg tip, okay? And there is always indeed some degrees of consolidation or migration involved. at least to have a single identity store where you want to look at to manage the users they are now delivering access to. Maybe they have attributes that are scattered all over the place and you need to do some sort of orchestration of those collection of information across multiple legacy systems. Okay? This is the second notion of orchestration. Orchestration intended not as user journey, but rather as gathering information from legacy systems because you want to migrate and consolidate, or because they want to coexist and leave them there. Okay? So it can be a one-off in a migration, or rather a runtime coexistence.
A lot of times the policies are so complex, like grandpa can do this, but his granddaughter can't. I mean, it's...
Yeah, this is yeah, absolutely. So there's again, in the interest of time today, of course, oh, sorry, one more question. I think, yes, we can allow one.
That success merging, integrating contract management with IGA to provide organization onboarding, is that a one-off, or is that a direction that...
Contract management, you mean, and organization onboarding. I mentioned before the notion of consent. Consent is the terminology of capability in the vendor. Consent can be around accepting terms and conditions or accepting attribute level consent for specific processing purposes. We assist to reflection of terms and condition acceptance being used. Terms and condition is what everybody's subject to and nobody reads when you access many websites, right? But you have that, of course, as part of what you need to comply with your contractual onboarding of an external organization and of the individual that now you're giving access to. So, okay, point. Apparently, I will be happy to address that as soon as we close, because they are kicking me out in a minute. Okay. Final slide, key things. So why is B2B different? Because it's not just about user, it's about onboarding organization and then onboarding users. Okay, that's the key thing. Do I need another identity solution for B2B? Well, it depends. Maybe you have an IGA solution, you have an access management solution, depending on what kind of solution are they and what kind of level of customization they allow, you might be already good to go and you can reuse them. More often than not, yes, you need something purpose design. Third, are there providers that do it all? Yes, there is this 30% that Gartner calls out of providers out there, we are among them, which are doing something purpose design for these use cases. Okay? With that, I'm very happy that you came over to listen to my to my story today. If you want to know more and some of the questions you came up with are answered in Identity at the Center podcast. If you're not familiar with that podcast, this is my first recommendation. Check that out. It's a beautiful and very interesting usage of your time if you are passionate about identity. Even more so, and that's the second recommendation, if you listen to my version of the story in an extended version with an ordinary voice, less Barry White-ish, okay, and is along with my colleague, Head of Product Management, Jason Kinnegan. So that is for your way home in your commuting. So thanks again for joining, and feel free to reach out in LinkedIn or via email if you want to know more about the requirement in B2B. So enjoy the rest of the time.